With Campaign 08 winding down to now just a matter of weeks, we are continuing our look at the major party candidates of our 5 congressional districts. Last week, we had quite a spirited session with the Democratic incumbent in the 1st Congressional District, John Larson of East Hartford, and his Republican challenger, Joe Visconti, a member of the West Hartford Town Council. Next week, October 19th, we focus on the 2nd District, Joe Courtney and Sean Sullivan. The following week, on October 26th, Rosa DeLauro and Bo Itzhaki. And on November 2nd, Chris Murphy and David Cappiello. Today we concentrate on the 4th District, where Republican Congressman Chris Shays of Bridgeport is seeking a 12th term. His challenger, former Wall Street executive Jim Himes of Greenwich, who also ran a nonprofit. Congressman Shays is not here today, having declined our many invitations to come here to appear on Face the State. In fact, this past summer, as we were putting together our fall political schedule, we even offered the Shays campaign the opportunity to pick the date, any date. They turned down our invitation, so we then scheduled the other races and selected this date to concentrate on the 4th, and Mr. Himes has accepted. Mr. Himes, thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Dennis, delighted to be here.
First of all, I want to ask you, what makes you qualified to become a congressman?
Well, particularly now, as we're opening the newspaper every single day and reading the catastrophe that has happened in our financial services industry. I worked in that industry for 12 years, and it is a very complicated, very risky, very challenging field. And one thing I know we are going to do in the coming years is get Washington focused on making sure that what happened in the last couple of weeks never ever happens again. That we had to make $700 billion of our taxpayer money available to bail out private industry is unacceptable. I understand that industry, and I may not have said this a year ago, but I'm going to be part of working to make sure that this never happens again. I also, as you pointed out, left Wall Street 6 years ago to run an affordable housing nonprofit. We were really focused on trying to create opportunity in housing in our inner cities, to create economic opportunity. And frankly, I think that the challenges that we face in the coming years are going to be all about creating economic opportunity once again for American families.
Your opponent, the congressman, voted in favor of that $700 billion bailout. Did you support him in that move?
Well, when he voted that way, I suggested 2 things. I do believe that that bailout was necessary, and if I had been in Congress, I would have held my nose and voted for it, because the businesses in my district were not able to borrow money. And I sat down and I talked to people, and they were saying, we can't borrow money. We can't pay our employees 2 weeks from now. That's a very serious threat. I would have held my nose and voted for it, but I would have loved to have seen 2 things in that bill. One, a commitment, a real commitment to actually start the process of putting in place the regulatory structure and the oversight that will make sure that this never happens again. And 2, something for Americans. $700 billion for an industry. We should have had some sort of stimulus package in that bill, because we're going to need to do a stimulus package to get this economy back on its feet, and some kind of relief for homeowners who are struggling to keep their homes.
Who is to blame for this mess? President Bush? Secretary Paulson?
There is so much blame to go around on this issue. It was mortgage brokers who sold mortgages to people who didn't have income, didn't present documentation. It was, in some cases, homeowners who got themselves into mortgages that they never should have been in. It was the banks. There is plenty of blame to go around. But the failure that we should focus on is the failure of the government to protect us from where we are today. In other words, for decades now, we have had an oversight structure that made sure that banks didn't get themselves into the kind of trouble that, frankly, they've never gotten into quite to the extent that they've gotten into in the last couple of years. But our oversight completely failed. And this is something we really need to focus on, because my opponent, Chris Shays, is a senior member of the Congressional Financial Services Committee. The committee charged with making sure that this did not happen was asleep at the switch, and my opponent was asleep at the switch. And again, there's blame to go around, but we need to make sure that our government never allows this to happen again.
Was Senator Chris Dodd and Congressman Barney Franks, were they also asleep at the switch?
They were part of a Congress that in the aggregate should have been more focused. But I want to make this point. They did raise the alarm on occasion. What we are seeing is
on occasion, but not enough.
Well, not enough, right?
Should they resign their positions?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. Look, we have elections to address questions of accountability, and that's why I'm sitting here. The other piece of this is that we are where we are because there has been an ideology that says, take the referee off the field, regulate less, do away with regulation. My own opponent, Chris Shays, said it, and this is his words: the last thing I like seeing is regulation. That notion is a very, very dangerous notion. And Chris Dodd and Barney Frank were not saying the last thing I like to see is regulation. And that's why you see guys like Chris Shays and the presidential candidates trying to take our eye off the ball about whether this is really an oversight problem.
You worked on Wall Street for Goldman Sachs. Do you believe some of these companies pay their upper-ranking executives too much money?
Oh, no question. No question.
What can be done about it?
And look, you know, private corporations should decide and should be guided by their shareholders how much they pay their managers. Now, on the other hand, when government steps in and puts money into a private corporation, we get a say on what they pay their managers. But look, the whole system was set up to reward people for taking huge risks, to reward people very richly for taking huge risks. But when those risks went bad, there was very limited downside. A trader might lose his job. That's bad, but you know, compared to where we are today, where we're all paying the costs of a real mess up, that can't happen again.
What can be done, though, about it?
Well, you know, again, when we put our taxpayer dollars into a company, as we are going to do, and probably most of the banks in this country, we get a say as taxpayers. Nobody gets to walk away making a ton of money if those monies came from taxpayer dollars. But at the end of the day, we need to think hard about how we empower shareholders to force the board to hold their managers accountable. Not just pay them on this year's results, but pay them based on a long track record of producing results. If we could get shareholders to stand up for what they need to do, we'd have, I think, a safer and more intelligent economy.
And because you worked on Wall Street, you've had some inside knowledge that other members of Congress just you may never have. If elected, what kind of legislation might you propose to make sure this kind of financial mess doesn't happen again?
Well, I really believe that government has an obligation to protect us. And protecting us means you've got a regulatory structure that is clear, where lines of authority are simple and clear. And again, if we're going to put taxpayer dollars into these organizations, we have a right to expect that we can monitor the risk that these organizations are taking. So right now we've got this unbelievably complicated system, right? You've got the Federal Reserve, you've got the SEC, the Office of Thrift Supervision, the OCC, the state banking regulators. We need to simplify that. Make one organization, maybe one or two agencies that oversees our financial services sector and looks hard not just at the capital they have, but at the risks that they take.
Connecticut has the worst tax burden of all 50 states, and I think we rank third from the bottom in terms of what we get back. What, as a congressman, would you do to bring more money back to Connecticut and maybe less going out?
Well, that's a very good point. And I meet people every single day who are struggling under not just their federal taxes, but under huge property taxes. You know, our seniors, at a time when they're facing huge energy bills and more expensive food, are paying high taxes, particularly in some of our communities like Bridgeport. And so you know, it will be a real priority of mine to help ease that burden. One of the things we can do is cut back on the unfunded mandates that Washington puts on our cities. And of course, the classic is No Child Left Behind. That put a huge financial burden on our towns and our cities to do what the federal government said had to be done, but the federal government didn't provide the monies, and therefore people's taxes are going up, property taxes are going up. Another thing I'll do, and look, we've got some serious needs in this district, right? Our transportation situation down there in Fairfield County is nothing short of abysmal. We've got some cities that need a lot of help and that aren't going to revive themselves on their own tax breaks. So we need federal assistance. And to answer your question, when I'm in Congress, I'll be in the Democratic majority, and that really matters. That really matters. First of all, because I'll be able to bring the resources that the district needs. But the other thing I would mention is that this stuff is in my heart. For the last 6 years, I have worked on how you take challenges in our cities, whether they're housing challenges or creating jobs or bringing retail into the cities, how you do that. I've been working on it professionally for the last 6 years, and that's a set of skills I'm going to take to Washington, so we really see development in some of the parts of the district that need it.
Barack Obama, the standard bearer for your party, favors a tax plan which would increase taxes for those making $250,000 or more. It may sound like a lot of money, but in Fairfield County it doesn't always go that far because the prices of just about everything, including real estate, are so high. Do you think that's a wise plan? That tax plan is good for Fairfield County?
Well, that tax plan is going to hit Fairfield County harder than it'll hit other counties in the country, because of course we do have in certain areas a very affluent population. What I think is this: our tax policy has been really screwed up in a whole lot of ways over the course of the last 8 years. I mean, it led to the $9.6 trillion in debt that the country now carries. What is very clear to me is that our middle class families haven't seen any sort of benefit from the tax cuts that were put in place in 01 and 03. What I have specifically proposed, and I think this is an idea that may not only return some dollars to our middle class families, but get them, actually add some strength to our economy. I've proposed a series of tax cuts for families making less than $250,000 if they do one of three things. If they invest in education, if they invest in a first home, or if they save. In each case, they would receive a tax credit. So that's what I'm focused on, particularly now when there's a good chance that this economy is heading into a recession. We really shouldn't be talking about raising taxes, period. We should be talking about cutting taxes on our middle class, which is really hanging on by its fingernails right now.
So if the tax plan goes through as President, if he, as a President Obama, proposes this, would you vote against him if it's bad for Fairfield County and bad for your district?
Well, it really depends on two things. One, it depends on the overall economic environment. Look, in these kinds of economic times, we don't raise taxes, period, right? And secondly, it really depends on what we decide we want to do. We need to have an honest conversation as a country about what we want to do. Do we want to fix our infrastructure? If we do, that's going to cost us $1.5 trillion. Do we want to pay down this $9.6 trillion in debt that we've accumulated? I think so. If we do, that's going to cost us money. Do we want to do universal health care so that every family in this country has access to a doctor? I think we do. Do we want to fix our schools? This stuff is going to cost money. So we need to decide what we want to do. And if we decide that we want to do that stuff, and if fixing our priorities doesn't do it. Look, we got to stop spending $10 billion every single month, 6,000 miles away from here in the nation of Iraq. That's going to save us a lot of money. But you know what? If we decide we want to do these things, we may need to consider paying for it, which we haven't done in the last 8 years.
We need to take a quick time out for a commercial break. We'll be right back with more with Jim Himes in a moment.